and we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for coming. This is the Zines and Education meeting featuring Meredith Tummeti, who is running the zine initiatives out of the Centralia Library at Centralia College. So, welcome, Meredith.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want you to know that I think that this work has never been more important. I think when people are talking about things like how do we respond to education in the age of or to assessment in the age of AI and that kind of thing. And I think this kind of points a little bit towards that. Um, but just by way of getting started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and what's happening at Centralia College around zines?
Okay, so I became interested in zines a few years ago. I went to um, a conference, like Zines and Library conference. It was a very small virtual conference, and I thought, wow, that's pretty fun. Um, maybe I can incorporate this somehow here. And so I made our mini zine for the library that we have available for students that has information about the library, and it took off from there. So I had other people see about the little mini zine I had made, and they wanted to make their own, and they wanted to figure out how they could use it in their classroom. And so over the years, it has progressed a lot. We have students making bigger zines. They're doing research and incorporating sources, and they're using it to show mastery in their classes. So, to support this this upwelling of excitement on campus, we built a zine makerspace in the library, and we also were able to create some zine kits for checkout that students can take supplies home to be able to make physical zines. And then we've also been building our circulating zine collection here on campus as well, which is a very slow, slow process of original cataloging. So that more zines are showing up in the collection as time goes by. Um, but lots of times people know that like I am the zine person on campus, and so if they are thinking of using that as an assignment, um, then we get together and we figure out how that can work in their class.
Yeah, that's I think that was kind of like the first question that I sent you was what instructional strategies uh, have um, have faculty been integrating into their curriculum around zines? And I think I think we've got Greg is in the room too. He would be interested in knowing a little bit about how this would work in like a text-heavy English course, for instance.
So the closest thing that we have going on right now to a text-heavy English course would be our social problems class. It's a sociology class, a 200 level. And she had been having students write a research essay about social problems. And over time, she gravitated towards doing more climate justice in conjunction with the social problems. And while she was making that conversion, she went to a workshop that showed social justice zines, and she thought, "Wow, this is great. How can I incorporate this into what I'm doing?" So we chatted, and we came up with a plan that she would modify her rubric uh, to meet a zine, but it still is meeting all the course outcomes that that original essay was tied to. I guess their objectives, sorry, course objectives. And so when we first started out, I had been doing two sessions of library instruction in her class. So I was doing one about library research, and I was doing another about um, evaluating web sources. And we together came up with a plan to expand the library instruction. And so we started with zine history at the beginning, and students often are seeing zines for the first time in their life. They don't know what it is. And so I bring a bunch of zines and they look at them and they make observations. And then we go into doing all the information literacy and library research instruction, which has now expanded to 4 sessions. And then the class comes into the library, into the makerspace, and they do a hands-on zine folding, and they learn about copying, and they learn about best practices for constructing a zine. And then now we even have 2 work days in the zine makerspace for the class. So the whole entire class comes 2 days to work in their groups to put together the zines. And then last quarter, we actually had a zine fair. And so the students then distributed their zines to other students and faculty on campus because there had been an element that they needed to distribute, and we thought that like students weren't actually distributing the zine. So it's like a really scary thing to like go up to people and say, "Here, have a zine." So by having the zine fair, it like lowered that barrier and made it a little bit more accessible for students to distribute their zines and then be able to talk about the experience of distributing. So it's gone from an essay to this like whole thing that's spread out all throughout the quarter, and we're getting some pretty good zines out of it. They do research. They have to include citations. They even need to include citations for like images or attributions for images in their zines. And so we tried to make it as academic as possible, but still have it be fun. We've had students not feel comfortable doing like the physical putting together of the zines, and so they've made them using Canva or Google Docs, and I've helped to like print it as a booklet so they could then distribute it. And yeah, it's been an evolution over quarters and years to get to the point where we are today.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because the I was thinking about that, and one of the many links that I found on your LibGuide, and I put the LibGuide into the chat, um, led to the history of zines, and there was an image from an Elizabethan era pamphlet, and I've always thought those were really I got a real kick out of them, but didn't make the connection that we've been doing this for hundreds of years, probably longer. Um, and you mentioned accessibility, that there was a student uncomfortable putting together a zine, just the physical act of it, and I'm curious about that uh, with the on the accessibility angle. What have you run across with that with your students?
So when I saw your question about accessibility, I started to think about it, and I started to investigate whether Canva is actually accessible for people to use. And it seems like it can be to a point. It seems like there might still be problems when it gets exported to a PDF, having those tags go across. So that's probably not not accessible at this moment. Um, but students who are more comfortable with like building a PowerPoint could use Canva because it has a lot of those same elements. And they've turned out very like professional looking and smooth. It's not as crafty as some of the other ones that, they've cut out pictures from clip art books or whatever and glued it on there. So it just has a different aesthetic. But I know that I've worked with students in in the past who were able to use Google Docs successfully with a screen reader. So that definitely could be an option. It's like the building of it, I think would probably be okay. It's the on the other end when it becomes a PDF where a lot of those accessibility issues come in. And we as a campus are working on like trying to find a solution for remediation of some of these things because we know that we have a lot of elements that haven't been remediated that exist on our campus in all different classes. And so I feel like digital zines would be in that wheelhouse of that we're looking for a solution of how to make these more accessible.
Right. Yeah, the one thing I've noticed about Canvas or Canva lately is that the accessibility pieces I think are getting better.
They are.
It used to be where like I would do a newsletter for the TLC or for the accessibility committee, and I would be in a program like Canva, and I'd have to download it as a PDF and then open it up in Adobe and spend a lot of time fixing it. And
Yeah.
I'm having to fix fewer things, I've noticed, as the company has been trying to really attract the education market. And
Hmm.
that's usually when companies start to begin going, oh, they're not going to use us unless we attend to the accessibility. Uh, and but this whole thing is one of the things that fascinates me is that there's always the point where kind of a new, um, you know, something that comes on campus that's new. And there's these little points along its history, where whether it's AI or whether it's zines or anything, where there's a couple of early adopters, and then at one point the a spark just kind of like flows across campus and things start happening. And we really got that sense when we were visiting Centralia. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that what was how the zine culture kind of grew on your campus, and who were your early adopters, and how did it evolve into what it's become today?
Um, so one of our earliest adopters is an English and humanities professor, Matt Young, and he's also the the advisor for our literary magazine on campus. And so he right away, like overnight, went home and made a zine for the Spilled Ink magazine. It's sort of blurry. Sorry, I can't get it in the right place. It wants to focus on my face. So he he made a zine, and then he was like, "How can I use this in my literature class? Like, how can I have students make zines in literature class?" And so we figured out he had an assignment where students had to interpret a piece of writing that they had read in class, like little short stories and poetry and things like that. And so now they are making a zine that reflects a piece of writing, and then they do a short reflection, right, like piece that they turn in separately of like their experience and why they made their choices in their zine for that literary piece. That has also changed over time. The first time he told them that they needed to make a 12-page zine, and so somebody found instructions on how to make a 12-page micro mini zine that was like an inch square. Um, and that didn't go over well for for actually getting a point across of more than just like a little stick figure on each page or something. So that class we have evolved into doing a larger format zine, and they have to like we talk about like page order, and they come in and they do a zine workshop, hands-on zine workshop with me, so they're more comfortable with what's going on. Uh, we have had art class, drawing class. They have used zines. They used the more mini zine format, and they had an assignment. It was a few years ago now, but they created a zine where they had to make artwork for each page. It was less, it had less writing in it. It was more drawing based. So we also have a communications class on campus. It's intercultural communications, and zine is one of several options they can choose for their Get the Word Out project. And so they do research and they find sources, and then they produce something to get the word out about their topic. And so they have multiple options to do like a TikTok video or to make a flyer or to make a zine. I feel like there's another option that I'm forgetting. So I don't see very many zines come out of that class. Just because I think that it has like the highest bar of like participation and investment in time in there. So I think it's easier for a lot of students to do something else like make a poster or make a TikTok video.
Yeah, I think when we were visiting the library, I thought I saw an actual manual typewriter in there.
We
Is
do.
that
We have
yeah?
two.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I was like if somebody was wanted to get started in this in their own library, what's some easy ways to build out something like that? A
Um,
zine makerspace.
yeah, the Zine Makerspace is pretty bare bones. We have those two typewriters, which were campus property already when back in the day when people used to type like the triplicate forms or whatever. Those machines hadn't been surplus. They were hanging around. And so I was like, hey, I'm just gonna put these over in my makerspace. We have a paper cutter. I invested library money of like $30 for a long arm stapler. We had like I'll see messages on campus of departments getting rid of like weird colored paper that they have sitting around in their department, and so I always scoop that up so
Yeah.
so people can make canary colored zines or whatever. Um, we bring in a lot of our newspapers that get discarded from the library. Some of those end up in the stash. I bring catalogs and magazines from home, um, and so I've tried to keep it like more of like found items and free items that are supplying the zine maker space. The zine making kits that we made, so it's like in a big giant Ziploc bag, a 2-gallon Ziploc bag. These circulate. We have 13 that circulate, and we have two that are on reserve for library use only. So they have a selection of items in there. There's washi tape and string and a binding kit, a little cutting board, and an X-Acto knife. There's also, I made a checklist of everything that was in the bag, so hopefully it gets back into the bag. And then I made a zine of how to make a zine and how to use everything in the bag. So this also has that like secret page inside. Let me see if I can get it face up. That has all the information of how to use everything in inside the kit. These are really, really popular, and they were actually funded through a grant that we had a few years ago for it was for climate justice, and they because the sociology department, the sociology teacher was going to be using the zines in her class. She was able to buy the supplies for these zine making kits. So I gave her a list of all the things that we needed, and I made sure that we got extras to replace it if they went missing. Um, and these have been really popular because not everybody has everything at home. There are students who live here on campus in our dorms, and they don't have a lot of like craft supplies laying around. And can I please share the list and the zine template? Yeah. Yes, I can share that. I'll send it to Jeff, and Jeff can send it to everybody on the thing. Anyway, so that those have been great. I've also made a point of collecting books about zines and zine making. So we have resources here in the library. So those are included on my Lib Guide as well. And as I find new things, I add them to our collection. And the other thing, I made a list. Let me see. Let me see if we have everything. Oh, I actually I did a workshop too. I did a workshop for faculty and staff. We have an annual like peer professional development day where people who work at the college give presentations to other people who work at the college, and we choose and go to different sessions. And so I did a session about zine making to get some more information out there and to get people excited about it. So that was pretty helpful. I had probably like 8 people show up, but considering that there's like 10 sessions going on campus, that was like a pretty good turnout for that. And we had, hands-on zine making that day too. Um, the other thing I was going to say is our collection has been like building very like higgledy-piggledy. Um, we bought some zines. I had a donation from the Timberland Regional Library of zines they were discarding or zines that they had received and were not going to add to the collection. So I ended up with a paper box full of zines that I'm currently going through. Um, and then the other thing is when students make zines in class, I ask that they give one to the library so we can add that to the collection too. So we have some um, some representation of students here on campus and the assignments that they're doing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yes. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. Let's open up. I'm sure people are tired of hearing my questions, and you may have questions of your own.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm here for completely selfish reasons, you know. So I want to see. I like this. This feels like open pedagogy, where students are co-creating knowledge with the instructor and with one another. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Quick question. I
Hi,
think I
Heather.
remember hearing you say that you're cataloging all of the zines.
We are a very small library. We have 2 librarians and we have 2 paraprofessionals. And our paraprofessional that does cataloging does copy cataloging. And so I could have had her put the zines in, and it would have just been like the title and the author if there was one, and a date if she could find one. But that wouldn't provide for discoverability in our catalog. And so I am doing the discoverability piece, and that's why it's taking a really long time because I have to do that with the rest of my job.
Yeah, okay. We're putting a little distro together, and I think we're not going to catalog at all. We're planning to just kind of do like the take one, leave one approach and just let it be a little open-ended, especially since we're just getting this off the ground. It's early enough in the process. I don't know that it feels like making our catalog or try to fight through that right now would be worthwhile because it seems like a lot of work.
It is.
And Yeah. What's the pro? Is the discoverability your primary thing? Like, how? Tell me more.
The- It's
How are you like physically making them discoverable in addition to the catalog piece? Because that is for other people. What we're talking about is helping people find the zines when they come into the building. And so the two parts of that are that we can do it in the computer, and then physically you can do it standing there. And so that's kind of the like we were planning to just kind of go put them here by title A to Z, A to M, and here, to Z, and just do it that way and do the best you can as a starting point.
Well, so the zines have been living in my office in a box, and so it prevents access by other people. So by getting them cataloged and getting them out onto the shelf in the main library, students can access them themselves. They can check them out, they can take them home. If they get taken off the shelf and left on a table, we can mark them as being used. And so we can track usage of the different zines. The other thing is I use these zines as I go out into other classes as examples for students to use. And now I can track usage of those zines as well. And they count, like with all the rest of our material usage in the library towards our data numbers. So like if I was taking, 45 zines out of here several times a quarter and they're never getting counted, that was something that we wanted to capture as well. Because some of our items in the library get usage and some of them don't. And then it's nice to know what is getting used. And so if somebody like eventually I want to find somebody who is game at allowing students to use zines as source material for their research. We have a lot of per-zines, which are personal zines of people speaking of their experience that could speak to a lot of different subjects and a lot of different courses. And having them be discoverable in the catalog would help the students be able to find them. So if they are searching for a certain subject or a keyword, my zines will, because I've added a description and I've added like a table of contents into the catalog record, um, those those items become discoverable when somebody's searching on a topic. So.
So, Heather and Meredith, are you guys tabling at the Olympia Zine Festival?
I am not. I've
No?
been to it as a participant, like I've shown up
Yeah,
and I've bought zines from people. I have.
yeah, yeah.
And it was when it used to be in the fall, which it used to be in September, and now I think it's in May, March, May. I
I
don't
just
know,
looked it up and it says May 30th.
May
May
30th.
30th, yeah.
So there's a potential for rain in May. I think it was nicer weather probably in September, but they have their reasons for having it when they have it.
Yeah. Hey, any other questions, comments, ideas?
I think it's really cool what you're doing.
I have another question if nobody else does.
Yeah.
How are you physically displaying them in the building?
I have a shelf, like a bookshelf, and I got some like outward facing clear plastic things. I could probably run and grab one, but that will like disturb the Zoom. So I have them showing face out, and they're stacked behind. So it'd be like what you would put like magazines or picture books, little flippy Lexon, I don't know. They're clear plastic bins that like fit on a shelf. So I have some of those right now. The number that I actually have cataloged and out on the shelf is very small, and so eventually the whole bookshelf will get filled. We also have like a huge number of like the mini zines that are this size. Um, so I'm trying to figure out like how to showcase these. We have a couple little shelves that I could put, or like little holders that I could put some facing out on display. But they're I don't know. I need to figure out how to do that. I haven't gotten there gotten there yet. And we
Mm.
also we created a location in our library in the library software, which is called Alma. And so we have like a special zine location collection. And so all the books on zine making and the clip art for the zine making, I also included in that collection, and it's right next to the makerspace. So everything is like right there all together, co-located.
Yeah, those are kind of important questions. I noticed that they're the size of Magic the Gathering cards or something. You go into a sports
Yeah.
card or something like that and
Yeah, lots
look
of
at how
them.
they're storing them. Yeah,
Yeah, so like there's bigger ones and there's like smaller ones. This
yeah,
is like the
yeah.
size that we mostly try to force students to make because
There you go.
they have space. I try to encourage them to make even bigger ones, like this size, which is even bigger. This is not,
Mm.
this is one that I need to catalog, but um this is a scary size for students. They like it's like too much that they have to fill out. So nobody has taken me up on that. But we have had some that are made on legal size paper, which, let's see here. So the legal size paper ones end up a little bit wider than the letter size paper. And so there's more room to groove in there. But
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Well, again, Meredith, I want you to know that we really appreciate your work. And Hannah, did you have something you'd like to add?
Oh no, I we just did our first zine week in our we're e-learning, but we got given a maker space of sorts. We call it the
Yay.
create space. So like we're e-learning, but we have this physical space. So we just did our first zine week, and I think our next probably project is to get some example zines because I don't know, Marla, if our student workers actually made example zines, but like I think that's probably our next project.
We had a couple
Okay, good.
examples. We did also print out some basic directions on a couple different varieties and options. And basically, we've promoted it as Zine Week event. And for the week so far, we've had 95 people for the week.
Wow. That's
Um,
great.
which not everybody is participating in this event. Some of them are frequent, regular users of the space um, but the feedback I'm hearing is that most people have done one or tr attempted one, and they're kind of into it. So it's the first time we've been doing it, and honestly, Hannah had sent me this stuff, and I'm like, "What's a zine?" I have no idea what we're talking about. So I had to do a little reconnaissance on my own.
And I'm teaching this quarter, and like our final project, they can basically do whatever they wanted. So I've been trying to like nudge them in the direction of like, you can go in here and make a zine. But I don't
Mhm.
know if anybody's done it, but I tried.
Well, and it seems to be pretty popular, and we had all the stuff to begin with anyway,
Oh,
with a
cool.
lot of the art supplies. So it was an easy event lift for us financially and in the manual labor as well. Um, so we'll probably do it again in some version, or maybe pick a theme and do it in that way, or do a little twist on it and recreate it again.
The one thing that I find that students have a lot of trouble with is like trying to figure out like the order of the pages and
Hmm.
then how to actually copy the zine to like copy the master zine to make copies. And so I've really tried to incorporate those two things into my instruction when I do workshops, because we'll get all kinds of creative creative binding and stapling together of backs and fronts of pages or tape or glue or whatever. Um, yeah, that tends to be something that I really have to teach, and I have to like remind them that they can come and have me help them with their copying if they need it. I'm here for that.
So little inside baseball, do you try at all to like really put the threshold concepts into the process as you're doing it, or is it just kind of um, primarily serving the learning outcomes of the course that they're doing it in? Because it feels like it's such a natural way to introduce the conversation around authority, and that scholarship is a conversation, and that information creation is a process, and like so many
Hmm.
of those threshold concepts are embedded in what's happening. So I was wondering how how much you concretely connect those, or if you're just doing it sort of contextually, or if you don't worry about that all and you just kind of focus on the course outcomes.
I connect some of them when I'm doing like the initial what are zines and zine history. I talk about how like authority is constructed and contextual. I really talk a lot about like attributing your sources and making sure that you're giving that credit to the people who have created that image or that information that you are then using. Um, some things it's a like a fine line though, because zines are like really anarchist in some ways, and so you just like my first zine for the library, I had gotten a picture of our mascot, our college mascot, and I had like cut him apart and like put him back together and made him like holding books and computers for the library. But then I got in trouble um, because I was like unauthorized use of the college mascot, and so then I had to replace it with a picture of a little beaver using a computer. Um, but yeah, so I don't always follow my own rules. Apparently, I'm a little anarchist myself. Um, but but yeah, I get what you're saying. And yes, I try to balance like the our library um our library teaching objectives of like trying to get all the information literacy in there, but then I'm also trying to meet the course objectives for that assignment as well. So um, yeah, but that's why it's like it's a team situation between me and the faculty member of that class.
Okay. Um, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. And I want to thank Meredith for taking the time for sharing with us. And I'm glad that like we came to go talk about AI at at Centralia, and that's where we met Meredith. And I'm so glad that that spirit of collegiality has created these events. So
Yay.
I look forward to following your work and hearing more of the successes down there.